This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 131. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 131. And in this episode, we are going to discuss the 7-step process for creating your own BAS training plan. So in last week's episode, or depending on when you're listening to this, episode 130, we talked through how training and essentially getting skilled up enough to perform building automation needs to change. We talked about the old way of doing training, the multi-year apprenticeship, do your time, slow kind of process that's not really led to a lot of success since we've got such a huge skill set gap and just talent gap in the industry. And then we talked about a new way of approaching training, one where you go and either self-train or you use some form of online training or some form of accelerated boot camp to get yourself skilled up. So I left you all in episode 130 with a statement that you can self-train, you can develop your own BAS training plan if you have the motivation to do so. But we didn't go into the how behind all of that. And that's what this episode is going to discuss. In this episode, we are going to go through how to develop your own BAS training plan and why that is so important. And the reason it's so important, I'm not going to leave you hanging, is because in order to rapidly learn new skills, which is something that's critical for building automation work, especially if you want to be a high-paid BAS professional, then you need to be able to learn new skills and learn them, we're talking in a matter of days. So if you develop the capability to self-train and the ability to identify a skill set gap and then close that gap as rapidly as possible, that is the most valuable skill you can have as at least a technical BAS professional, because that is going to massively increase your value to the market because you're going to be able to know whatever you need to know about whatever you need to know. And what that means is, let's say you get sent to a job site and all of a sudden they're like, oh, hey, you got to go work on this Modbus system. And you're like, oh, I've never worked on Modbus. Well, now you can quite simply go and use this 7-step process and close that gap rapidly. So what is the 7-step process? Well, it consists of, surprise, surprise, 7 steps that are meant to help you identify the skill set gap, figure out where you're at, figure out a way to close that gap, and then create a plan to actually close that gap and then execute that plan with constant adjustment. So step 1, you first need to identify the skill. Let's say you're brand new. You are sitting here, you're listening to this podcast. You're like, I'm a mechanic or I'm straight out of school or something like that. And you want to get into building automation. Well, the first thing you need to do is identify the skills for an entry-level building automation technician. So if we were going to do that, then what would happen? And if you hear some mouse clicking and some typing in the background, it's because I'm actually doing it with you. So if I went here and I typed in BAS Controls Technician, and I just put that, right? And first thing that pops up, entry-level BAS Controls Technician, Tech USA. Let's click on that, okay? And it says, these folks are looking for controls tech, pays about $18 an hour, and needs to do some simple things, right? Basic install methods, startup and checkout and commissioning, develop computer graphics, go and work on the engineering team to help with estimates. I mean, okay, I honestly don't think these are skills for an entry-level technician. I wouldn't want an entry-level technician doing estimate preparation, but whatever, that's a whole nother can of worms. However, looking through this, I can start to get an idea of some things I may need to know. Hey, I need to know how to read MEP plans, so mechanical, electrical, and plumbing plans. I need to understand basic installation methods, startup and checkout and commissioning. So I've started to identify, step 1, some key skills. Now, Then we move from there to step 2, and we say, hey, we need to identify any supporting skills. So let's first start off with basic installation methods, startup, checkout, and commissioning. Okay? So let's take that one set of skills and let's think of some supporting skills. And this is really important. I know this may seem a little long and drawn out here, but this is a podcast episode I really encourage you to listen to with a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. And I encourage you to do this active exercise that we're actually doing on the podcast right here. So as I said, we searched for a BAS controls technician, right? We found the job responsibilities on the job description. We picked one of the skills out. We said basic install methods, startup, checkout, and commissioning, okay? Now we're at step 2, identify any supporting skills. So when we identify any supporting skills, what does it take to install a sensor? I mean, just think about it. Now I realize for some of you, you may have never installed a sensor before. And this is where a lot of folks get tripped up. They're like, oh crap, I've never installed an actuator. I've never installed a sensor. Okay, well, have you installed anything? Have you installed a light? Have you ever wired up anything? Just think about it. What do you think would have to happen for you to be able to install something? So we've got a, let's say, temperature sensor. And you need to figure out what supporting skills support the installation of that temperature sensor. Well, where could you go? And if you notice a lot of pauses in me talking today, it's because I want you to think during these pauses. I want you to think, man, where would I go, Phil? What would I do to figure out how to install a sensor? And some of you right now are listening and you're very seasoned technicians and you're like, I don't need to know how to install a sensor. This is stupid. Well, think about it. What if I said the skill was going and programming an API using JavaScript? This same 7-step process is going to work along with the supporting skills. It doesn't matter what the skill is, no matter how complex or how simple it may be. This 7-step process, and this is the beauty of it, it scales to whatever complexity you're facing. So whether it's programming APIs, whether it is doing complex central plant programming, whether it is doing wiring up a simple resistive sensor, this 7-step process is going to work. And we'll do 3 examples towards the end of this episode. Okay, but identify any supporting skills. Well, a couple things you could do if you haven't already thought of these. You could go and do YouTube and look up how do you install a sensor, and you'd see, oh, look, they cut a hole in the wall, they go and they pull the wires through it, they go and connect the wires using wire nuts. Oh, I probably need to know something about wiring, probably need to know about going and understanding sensor types. These are all supporting skills that you can develop. And then once you've done that, once you've identified the skill and you've identified any supporting skills, you move on to step 3. And this is where you've got to be really honest with ourselves. You know, folks tend to fall into 2 camps. Either they really undervalue and just think, oh man, I'm the worst at this, or they're thinking, I'm the best at this, and they overvalue their skill set. So you got to be really honest with yourself with step 3. And you've got to define where you're at. Where are your skills at? Have you never pulled wire in your entire life? Have you never mounted a sensor? Then you're probably pretty new. And that's okay as long as you're honest with yourself. Because what that's going to do is that is going to help you go and map out your development plan. It's going to help you map out where you're at. Because in order to get to where you're going, you need to know where you're starting. So let's say you have never pulled wire before, you've never mounted a sensor, you've never calibrated a sensor, you don't even know what the words startup and commissioning mean, so you're completely green. That's fine. Now we move on to step 4, which is mapping out the gap. What this means is you say, oh, well, I don't know what startup checkout commissioning are. I probably should learn what those are. I should know some research. I've done some research now. I don't know, and we'll come back to this in step 7, what we're doing. I don't know about wiring. I don't know about sensor mounting. I need to add that. So you've mapped out the progression, at least as best as you can, from what you need to learn and kind of what order you need to learn. Now we move on to step 5, which is find your parts and processes. Google is freaking awesome. I think one of the best skills you can learn in building automation in these days is learning how to effectively use Google. That way you can go and understand what to do. So for example, if I go to Google right now and I type how to wire a 1K nickel, let's say right there, or how to wire a temperature sensor. Okay, how to wire a temperature sensor. Oh, look at that. Automation tutorial. How to wire a temperature sensor. Temperature sensor wiring. How to wire this sensor. How to wire a temp sensor. Temp sensor wiring. How do I wire a temp sensor? I mean, the list is endless. You can literally just type in. When you Google, I want you to think of questions. They've done a lot to improve Google to the point where when you ask a question, it will go and try to find an answer. Because you got to figure billions of people are using this millions and billions of times a day, and it's logging the questions they ask and which responses provide the best answer. So you can really do yourself a favor in step 5 by asking the question. How do I wire the temperature sensor? How do I create MEP drawings? How do I do controls programming, etc., etc., etc. Once you've done that, you'll notice, and I probably should call this step, and I'm gonna change it. Step 5 should be find your processes and parts, because quite honestly, you need to identify your processes first. And once you do that, once you identify your processes, once you go and figure out what the process is, then what is going to naturally happen is from those processes, you're going to identify parts that you need in order to do those processes. Does that make sense? If I go and Google how to wire a temperature sensor and I notice that there's wire nuts, and there's a temperature sensor and maybe even a BAS controller, then I could probably reasonably infer that I need to get those parts. And this is where the rubber meets the road. Remember in the previous episode, and if you didn't listen to it, I really encourage you to go back and listen to episode 130. But in the previous episode, I said to you, you've got to be willing to spend money on your own development. And this is part of that. You've got to be willing to start building your own controls lab. If you are being serious about becoming a BAS professional, at least from a technical or engineering perspective, you need to start building up your lab. Now, if you're in sales, the 7-step process would work for you just as well. You would just be going and looking up sales books and sales training, and you would still map out your processes. How do I communicate the ROI of installing a new control system, of performing a controls retrofit, etc., etc., etc. So now that step 5 has been done, we move on to step 6, where we create our lesson plan and schedule. A lot of folks don't want to do this step. It's an uncomfortable step. It feels very mechanical. And for a lot of us, that's not a good thing. We like to just get our hands on stuff and touch it and feel it and do it. The idea of sitting down and visualizing out the steps and planning it out and is not appealing and not natural. But you need to do it. Not only will this make sure that you're developing your training plan effectively and that you've created a realistic schedule to achieve it, because that which gets measured gets done. So if you put no time limit on your training, life is going to fill in the gaps, and you're going to be sitting here a year from now having accomplished nothing. But if you approach it with a plan and a schedule, you'll be much more effective. And this will carry over into your day-to-day career. You will start to naturally develop the habit of looking at a problem, looking at a project, looking at a task, and in your head developing a plan to execute that task and a schedule. A lot of folks back when I was in the field would ask me, how are you able to look at projects, look at things, and kind of instantly create a bill of materials and a schedule and a cost and figure out how much it would cost? Because I could do that. I could look at something, I would close my eyes, I would visualize myself doing it, and then I would say, okay, that would take this many hours, that I'd need this, and I could get pretty close on a swag number for estimates. I mean, it will never be as good as sitting down and actually planning something out on paper, but you'll get to the point where you can do that, and that is another invaluable skill. Now, I mentioned step 7. Step 7 is where we are going to continuously adjust our approach. Now, this is really important. You see, whatever you do, whatever 7 steps or 6 steps to this point you establish, you're going to learn information during the process. If you're not learning information and getting different ideas during the process of these 6 steps, at least to this point, then you're doing something wrong. Because you should go and, for example, in the case of installing a sensor, you should be installing a sensor and saying to yourself, oh man, well, I really don't understand what ohms and resistance is. I need to go learn that. Or, oh man, this sensor actually requires external power. Why would I be using external power? Why would I not use the power from the controller? And then you have to go and research. You do there's that. You need to continuously adjust your steps. Now, you got to be careful when you do this, because the tendency can be to continuously adjust to the point where you never complete. It gets to a point where you start to have diminishing returns. And this, unfortunately, is an experience thing. But you can still go and use your better judgment and say, you know what? I probably don't need to know how to use an oscilloscope in order to go and install a XYZ controller. Sure, it would be great to understand that if I ever have to get into really complex communication bus troubleshooting. But right now, I really just need to understand how to install the controller and how to connect the wires and configure the internal and external switches and all that fun stuff, okay? So that's the 7 steps. Step 1, identify the skills. Step 2, identify any supporting skills. Step 3, define where you're at. Step 4, map out the gap. Step 5, find your parts and processes. Step 6, create your lesson plan and schedule. And step 7, continuously adjust. To this point, we have gone and went through just that basic example. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go through 3 very common examples and, some reasons why folks come to us and utilize our courses, because we've given them the process and the instruction to go and actually accomplish these tasks. So let's look at these 3 examples. Example 1 is learning how to program a field controller. Why not tackle the most difficult topic a lot of folks seem to face up front? So if we identify the skill, we figured out that we want to program a field controller, but we probably want to get a little tighter than that. Do we want to do free programmable controllers, or do we want to do application-specific controllers? Because those are 2 totally different skills. Let's say we want to do free programmable. Let's pick the more difficult of the 2. Well, we know that we have some supporting skills. 1, we need to understand how to use the programming software. That's probably pretty important. 2, we need to understand HVAC systems. 3, we need to understand how to read controls documentation in order to know what the HVAC systems are supposed to do. Then step 3 would be defining where we're at. We would say, okay, do we know these skills? If we don't, then we need to map out those gaps. From that point, we move to step 5, where we go and we look up, is there a controls programming process like the one we teach in our programming course? So you could go and find processes. You could go and forums. You could Google a variety of different things. Then you need to find out, how am I going to practice the programming? Well, what parts do you need? You probably need a field controller. You probably need power for that field controller. And you probably need some programming software. For most of our courses, we use the EasyIO solution because it is a low-cost solution with free programming software. So you can pick up one of those controllers, at least at the time of this recording, for around $200, depending on the controller model, and then their programming software is free. It is a great practice product. From there, we move on to step 6. We create our lesson plan and our schedule. And from step 7, we continuously adjust as we learn. Let's look at another example, learning how to set up remote access. Another very difficult topic for a lot of folks, and one that we tackle in our information technology course. So how would you approach this? Well, first we would identify the skill. We want to set up remote access to our building automation system server. Well, what supporting skills would we need? Well, we'd need to understand networking, need to understand servers, we need to understand remote access software. Those are some 3 basic supporting skills. From there, we have to define where we're at with step 3. And then with step 4, we map out the gap. Step 5, we find our processes and parts. And fortunately, we can go and Google how to set up remote access, how to set up VPNs, how to set up VNCs, virtual network connections. So a variety of different methods for approaching remote connectivity. Then we find our parts, which in this case may simply be software. We may have to get a physical part to test, but we may be able to do it all through virtualization. Step 6, we create our lesson plan and schedule. And step 7, we adjust as we learn. And for the last example, and hopefully through these examples you're seeing, and this is kind of demystifying the self-study process, and it's really helping you to see how you could go about creating your own learning and lesson plan, because I feel as if a lot of folks hold on to knowledge and they don't share it, and they act like it's really hard to acquire because it gives them power. It gives them a sense of purpose, and that's why they don't share it. And I shouldn't say a lot. That's not a fair statement. I should say there are some folks out there who do that, because I've met plenty of people who, throughout my career, have been willing to share with me. You've got to be willing to admit you don't know something and be willing to ask and humble yourself. But beyond that, there have been quite a few people. But there are also people who don't share at all. So I'm hoping that this will figure you through these examples how you could do that. So example 3 is learning how to configure a BAS server. So let's look at that. Step 1, identify the skill. Well, we want to configure a BAS server. Well, what supporting skills will we need? Well, we have to know how to use a computer. That usually helps. We need to know how to install software. We need to understand IP addressing, networking, database setup, potentially server software setup. And then we define where we're at. Where are we at with learning those skills? Then we map out the gap between where we want to be and where we are. And we find our processes and parts. Maybe we need to go to Microsoft Evaluation Center, download a 180-day trial of Microsoft Server, and then from there we need to get Oracle VMware, I can't speak, I'm mixing up words, Oracle VirtualBox, and utilize that to act as our remote software. And then from there, we create our lesson plan and schedule, and we continuously adjust. I hope you've seen throughout this episode how easy it is to go and create your own learning plan using these 7 steps. Because here's the deal. Personal development is incredibly important. If you have one takeaway from this episode, I want you to know that it is possible to train yourself. I will tell you it takes longer. There's a lot of trial and error, to be completely honest, but you can do it. However, if you are someone who wants a little bit of help, you want this process you want the learning to achieve a skill completely packaged up so that you can just follow along and learn, but you want to do it from the comfort of your own home without ever having to travel, and you want to have access to it forever, then you really should go and check out our individual programs. If you are part of a team or you run a controls business and you would like to develop your staff, then reach out to us. You can reach out to us at sales@buildingautomationmonthly.com. And we have a corporate training program where we go about assessing your team. We do a skills assessment and we do a knowledge check. Based on the results from that, we meet with you and create a learning plan utilizing our courses for your employees. Then every other week, we have touch points to make sure that they are moving through the material. We provide live office hours for your students, and we help guide and test and evaluate them as they move through that learning process. The end result is an increase in profitability and proficiency for you through your techs being trained on how to execute high profit tasks. So once again, if that sounds like something that would benefit your business, help you to execute backlog that you haven't been able to execute, help you to train and level up your staff so that they are more skilled and better able to execute work, then I really encourage you once again to reach out to us at sales@buildingautomationmonthly.com. Now, with all that being said, everything I mentioned in today's episode can be found at buildingautomationmonthly.com/131. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/131. Really encourage you to use this 7-step process, and I would love to hear about your success with the process in the comments section. Thank you so much for being here, for listening. You all are awesome. I love the emails that we're getting from you. Thank you so much for the kind words and for the stories of the success you are experiencing. It is a blessing and an honor to be a small part in your success story. Thank you so much, and look forward to talking to you again next week. Take care.